Shadows are very important to make something look three-dimensional. Placement of those shadows, the intensity of those shadows, all these things are very important. Now, sometimes the shadows can be very simple, like way over here in the corner, we have this shadow being cast by this divider here. Very simple, just a line that's getting softer as it gets further away and so on. Some shadows can be a little more complex, like for instance, directly under people's feet. Now, they're being lit by multiple light sources, so if we go in real close under this guy's feet right here, real close, and you see that there's a dark shadow, slightly lighter as it gets further out and getting darker as it gets deeper inside underneath the shoe. The actual shadow that he's casting is coming from so many different light sources that you see multiple shadows being applied. Some lighter ones, different darker ones, depending on which light is hitting him just right. Now, I'm going to discuss this concept here, and I'm going to use my good old friend Steven Johnson, who's way over here, right there, this photographer. I'm going to put him into a completely different scene right here. So I got him right here, and there he's just standing by himself. I didn't complete his foot for the painting because his foot is hiding behind someone, so why spend all that extra time, especially when you look at the amount of detail that goes into the feet. So I just stuck a little black sock, so maybe he lost his shoe somewhere. But we're going to create the shadows for him. Now, he's going to create a complex shadow. If the light's coming directly above him, the shadow's going to be fairly easy to do. So I'm going to create a layer right below him here, and that's the shadow layer. And using black and a soft edge brush that's brought down in opacity, I can go in here and start to create the shadow that's going to be underneath them. Since it's brought down in opacity, I can create different hits at a time, making it darker and so on. And I can get in real close here and then start to really darken certain parts. So I'll get a much smaller brush and I can start to really darken right underneath this shoe right there, right underneath that part of his shoe where he's going to cast the most shadow, and then really darken underneath this shoe where he's going to cast a deeper shadow. Pulling back, you see that there he's got the shadow, which I could bring down the opacity of the shadow so it starts to look a little more realistic. Well, what if the light was coming from, say, another angle? Let's turn it off this way, and let's say the light's coming from this way. So now it's not just going to be some blur down here. It's going to actually start to take on the shape of his figure. That starts to get a little more complex. Now, you could go in there and start to redraw this whole thing here, but that would be kind of time-consuming. So what I'm going to do is do something totally different. I'm going to go in here and give him a drop shadow. There it is. He's got a drop shadow. Click OK. The drop shadow follows his shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that drop shadow and separate it from the layer. So I'm going to come over here and say Layer Style, Create Layer. And that separated the drop shadow into its own layer. So if I took him and moved him over here, there's his shadow, see? So now I could take this shadow layer right here and distort it into the shape that I want. So I'll go in here and say Distort. And I'll just grab this guy and bring it right into here and bring this guy way over to here. And I'm going to just kind of distort this shadow into position down on the ground right here below. It might need a little adjusting here and there, so we can do that after the fact. So I'm going to go in there and just create this shadow just like so, and maybe even down even more. So there we see that we now have this shadow that's being cast by him. So I can say, do it, bring it into position a little better, like that. And I might need to go in there and adjust it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in there and add a little bit. Let's just pick up that color and we'll just add some of these tones right into these areas right in here where we need them. And right in here, a little softening. And then we'll erase the parts we don't want. Like right in here, we don't want these little pieces right here. And want to soften this up a little bit. And there you can see that now we have a shadow that's being cast from a different source, and so we're starting to see the shape. Now it can get a little more complex, because what if the surface that the shadow is being cast on has a texture to it? So I'm going to just paste a file that I have in my background right here, and there we see that we have this kind of a sandy desert here. Now, of course, we'd have to go in there and put in his footprints going in, but we see that we have these mounds, so the shadow no longer looks proper. The shadow has to follow those little mounds. So here's where another little filter comes into play. So I'm going to take the shadow. There's my shadow right there. And I'm going to duplicate it just so I have another one just in case. I'm going to turn this one off. And that one I'm going to play with. So let's turn off our little desert here. And that's the shadow that's currently selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that shadow and come up here to my filters. And under Distort, I have a little thing called Displace. And with Displace, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to leave it at the defaults, which is 10 and 10. And I'm going to go in there and distort it. And by the way, these two little settings here, see the displacement map? What's going to happen here is that it's going to use another image. the image of the desert itself to displace my shadow. Now, it says the other image. Do you want to stretch it to fit, or do you want to tile it? Do you want the undefined areas to wrap around or repeat extra pixels? I never concern myself with this because I need that registration to go right over where those mounds are. So my displacement map, the other image, will be exactly the same size and resolution of the image I'm displacing. So when I click OK, it's going to ask me for that displacement map. Choose a displacement map, which on the desktop I have the desert right there. So when I click OK, you see that it distorted the shadow. When we look at that desert back on top, we see that it's distorting it based on the movements of the sand underneath there, and we can see how the effect works. So there you can see that the complex shadows can either be very simple shadows like this. This is directly beneath him. All right, there's that one, which we'll put right beneath him again. There's that one. Or they can be a shadow off into the distance like that. Let's turn this one off. Or they can be a complex shadow over a complex texture that starts to look like that.